"Get out," he said. "This tunnel floods in 20 minutes and the gas is already leaking. You don't know me. You don't owe me anything. Leave." Haley looked at the man pinned beneath 400 pounds of steel and motorcycle and cold black water rising to his waist, and she said, "Neither do you," and got to work. That moment, a homeless girl choosing a stranger's life over her own safety would unravel 11 months of silence, expose a $1 million crime, and bring three hardened riders face to face with a ghost they had been told was gone forever. If this kind of story moves you, real courage, hidden truth, loyalty tested to the bone, please subscribe to our channel and follow this story all the way to the end. Drop a comment and tell us what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. The alarm on Haley Monroe's phone did not wake her that Tuesday morning because she had never gone to sleep. She had been lying on her side on a folded moving blanket, listening to the rain hammer the concrete above her head, counting the hours until the temperature would crawl back above freezing. She did that every night when the cold came. Hard did the math on survival, the way another woman her age might calculate a grocery budget. How much body heat was left? How many layers she could reasonably add before her joints stopped working properly? Whether the drainage flow beneath the overpass would climb high enough to reach her spot before morning. It hadn't this time. Small mercy. At 5:15, she gave up on rest entirely, rolled to her feet, and started moving. Movement was warmth. Movement was purpose. She had learned that early in the 11 months since the last place she had called home stopped belonging to her. She pulled on her second pair of socks, laced her boots in the dark from pure muscle memory, and shouldered the backpack she kept packed and ready at all times. Not because she expected to run, she had run enough to know that running without a destination was just another kind of standing still, but because the habit of readiness was the only thing that had kept her sane. The bag had 3 compartments. The first held her documents, a birth certificate in a waterproof sleeve, a state ID that was 3 months from expiring, 2 folded letters she had kept because they were the only proof that anyone had once believed she was worth something. The second held her tools, a short pry bar, a length of paracord, a folding knife, a headlamp with fresh batteries, a small first aid kit that's significantly more advanced than anything a 22-year-old woman living under a railway overpass was expected to carry. The third held everything else: 2 granola bars, a half-full water bottle, a change of socks, and a worn canvas pouch that held, among other things, a hand-sewn embroidered patch she had never once taken out in daylight. She didn't look at the patch. She never looked at it when she was alone. The rain had stopped sometime around 4 in the morning, but the runoff was still moving hard through the drainage channels that ran beneath and around the old Burlington Northern Overpass on the eastern edge of Silver Creek, Colorado. Haley knew those channels, the way a longtime resident knows their neighborhood streets, every fork, every low point, every spot where the flow sped up around a curve, and every quiet eddy where debris caught and collected. She had found aluminum cans, dry salvageable lumber, 3 perfectly good sleeping bags, and once, inexplicably, a sealed case of bottled water in those quiet eddies over the past months. The drainage system was, in its way, generous. She was moving along the North Channel bank with her headlamp cutting a narrow beam through the pre-dawn dark, looking for anything useful before the city's early shift maintenance crews arrived, when she heard it. Not loud. That was the thing that stopped her first, not the sound itself, but its quality. It was low and controlled, the sound of someone who was trying very hard not to make a sound and losing the fight. A man's voice. A man in pain, working to keep that pain from escaping into the open air and failing in small, bitten-off increments that he probably couldn't even hear himself making. Haley stopped walking. She stood completely still for 4 seconds. She counted and listened past the drip of water off concrete and the distant sound of a truck on the highway overpass 200 yards east. The sound came again, and this time she got a direction on it: the maintenance tunnel. The one that ran under the South Rail embankment, partly blocked since last spring when a storm debris pile had pushed against its eastern mouth. She had looked into it twice and decided it wasn't worth the effort. The blockage was unstable, and the floor flooded when the creek ran high. The creek had been running very high since yesterday afternoon. She moved toward the tunnel entrance without deciding to move toward it, which was how she had always operated in situations that mattered. Decision came after action. Thinking too long in the wrong moment had a cost she'd paid before. The entrance was a concrete arch roughly 4 feet high, blocked to about 2/3 of its width by a collapsed tangle of storm debris, broken timber, rebar, a section of chain link fencing, and what looked like the roof panel of a livestock trailer. The water flowing through the lower portion of the opening was cold and fast-moving, about 8 inches deep. She could hear it picking up speed somewhere inside. And from somewhere inside, that same low, controlled, losing battle of a sound. "Hey," she called, keeping her voice flat and carrying. Not a shout she had learned not to shout in the dark when she didn't know what she was dealing with. "Hey, can you hear me?" The controlled sound stopped. Then, "Get away from here. Go." A man's voice, tight with something that wasn't quite anger and wasn't quite panic, but was working very hard to hold both of those things in check. Deep voice, used to giving orders and having them followed. Used to the orders being obeyed, not because of rank but because of something in the voice itself that made argument feel like a bad idea. "I can hear water moving inside," Haley said. "How long have you been in there?" A pause. She could almost hear him recalculating. "Since about 1 in the morning, he said, and there was a shift in his voice when he said it, not softness exactly, but a crack in the control where the reality of that number landed. 1 in the morning. It was now 20 past 5, 4 hours, in rising water. "Are you pinned?" she asked. Another pause, shorter. "Motorcycle came down on my left leg. There's a beam." He stopped. Started again. "I've been working at it. I can't move it from this angle. Is the gas still leaking?" The pause this time was different. Surprised. "You can smell it from out there?" "I can smell it from here." "Yes. How close is the water to you right now?" "Hip level." It was knee level 20 minutes ago. Haley was already calculating. She didn't think about it in terms of steps or a plan. It wasn't that organized. It was more like the landscape of the problem simply appeared in her mind complete, and she could see where the pieces were and what she needed to reach them. She had a pry bar. She had paracord. She had a headlamp. The debris pile, blocking the entrance, had a section of railroad timber in it. She could see the end of it from where she was standing, and it was a good piece, 6 feet at least, maybe more, not rotted through. She could work with that. "I'm coming in," she said. "No, firm, absolute. You're not. This tunnel floods completely when the creek hits a certain level. It's going to flood. The gas, I know what gas and water do," she said. "How far in are you?" "Girl, how far?" She heard him exhale. A long breath through his nose. She recognized that exhale. It was the sound of a person who was very good at being in control, realizing that control had moved to someone else's hands. 30 feet, maybe 35. "There's a maintenance ledge about 15 feet in on the right side, maybe 18 inches above the current water level. Can you move at all? Arms, upper body?" "Yeah. Upper body's fine. Leg is trapped below the knee. I've got feeling in my foot, which means it's not..." He stopped again. "It's not as bad as it could be." "Okay." She was already pulling the railroad timber free of the debris pile. "Here's what's going to happen. I'm going to get inside and I'm going to need you to tell me exactly what I'm looking at when I get there. Can you do that?" "You're insane," he said. But it wasn't quite an objection anymore. It was more like an observation he felt obligated to make before he did what she told him. "Probably," Haley said. "Talk me through the debris on the floor as I come in. I don't want to trip." She went in through the gap at the lower left corner of the entrance, where the debris pile left about 2 feet of clearance above the water level. The cold hit her like a door swinging open in January, full body and immediate. The water was deeper inside the entrance than she'd expected, closer to 12 inches, and moving with a steady, purposeful current that wanted to push her sideways toward the right wall. She braced against it and let her headlamp sweep the tunnel ahead. "There's a section of fencing about 8 feet in, mostly on the right," the man said. His voice was different now, still controlled, but focused in a new direction. helping rather than refusing. It's not blocking the path. There's a wooden pallet sunk in the middle of the floor, about 12 feet in. The water goes over it. Watch your footing there. Got it. I see you. She did. Her headlamp reached him at about 30 feet he had estimated well. He was a large man, not just tall but broad, with a quality of physical presence that even the dim light and his current situation didn't entirely diminish. He was propped against the left wall of the tunnel on a narrow concrete ledge, upper body above water, but his lower body from the hip down on the left side was submerged, and she could see even from this distance that there was something preventing him from pulling his left leg up. A motorcycle lay partly on its side in the water beside him, its weight and the weight of a fallen steel support beam pinning him through a combination of angles that made simple lifting impossible. The gasoline smell was sharp enough to taste. He looked at her. She could see his eyes tracking her headlamp, then her face, and he said, "You're not from around here." "I'm from here now," she said, which was a shorter answer than the truth deserved, and the only one she was prepared to give. She waded to him, feeling the floor with each step the way she'd been taught years ago in training she wasn't supposed to have anymore. When she reached him, she crouched down and got her hands in the water without hesitating, locating the trap by feel. The motorcycle's frame was resting against the beam, and the beam had caught his boot and lower shin between 2 points of contact. It wasn't crushing, not enough weight at the right angle for that, but it had him wedged with no room to slide in any direction. "Mason," he said, when she didn't introduce herself, like he felt the absence of names and wanted to fix it. She looked up at him. "Haley, how old are you?" "Old enough to know you need to stop talking and let me think for a minute." He almost smiled. She could see it in the set of his jaw, the almost smile of a man who had not smiled in 4 hours and was surprised to find the impulse still operational. She thought. She moved her hands through the water, measuring distances and angles by touch in the dark water, building the shape of the problem in her mind. The beam was steel, probably 40 pounds per foot, and the section resting against the motorcycle was maybe 5 feet long, call it 200 pounds in the water, which was somewhat buoyant, but not enough to matter. The motorcycle was a Harley, a Road King, from the look of the tank above the waterline, maybe 700 pounds dry. Together they formed a kind of accidental vice. She needed a fulcrum and a lever. She looked back toward the debris pile at the tunnel entrance. The railroad timber she'd freed was still at the entrance. She'd been planning to bring it in. It was long enough. She needed something for a fulcrum. "The pallet," she said. "The one 12 feet back. Is it rotten?" "Didn't feel rotten when I was walking over it," Mason said. "How long ago was that?" "When I first came in to check the motorcycle. Before the beam came down. Maybe 40 minutes after the crash." She moved back through the water to the pallet, grabbed its edge, and found it solid treated lumber, heavy, well-constructed. She wrestled it free of the floor and began dragging it toward Mason. It was unwieldy in the current, fighting her sideways, and she had to go slow to keep her footing. "What are you doing?" Mason asked. "Fulcrum," she said. "A beat. You know mechanical leverage." "I know a lot of things," she said. "Don't make it a conversation." She got the pallet positioned against the left wall, 3 feet from where Mason was pinned. Then she went back for the timber, fighting the entrance current twice in 90 seconds, and got the long piece of railroad wood inside. The gasoline smell was worse now. The disturbance in the water from her movement was releasing more of it, and the air inside the tunnel had a headache quality, a chemical thinness that she recognized as something to take seriously. "The gas worries me," Mason said. He was watching her work with the focused attention of a man who had decided to trust someone and was still running the math on whether that was the right call. "It worries me too," she said honestly. "We're going to be fast." She got the timber positioned one end under the motorcycle's rear frame, the pallet as a pivot point 2/3 of the way down the timber's length from where she was pushing. She had paracord looped through the beam and tied to the motorcycle's fork in a configuration that would allow the beam to ride up as the motorcycle's frame lifted, rather than swinging free. It wasn't elegant. It was functional. "When I push down on this end," she said, The motorcycle's going to shift towards you before it lifts. Be ready for that. Tell me the moment your leg can move. Understood. It won't slip, he said, not to reassure her, because he'd looked at the setup and done the math himself and arrived at the same answer. She pushed. The timber groaned. The pallet held. The water around the motorcycle churned and the beam shifted with a sound like a slow complaint metal on concrete. Heavy and reluctant. The motorcycle's rear frame lifted an inch, then two. Left now, Mason said tightly. I need to rotate my... He moved. She felt the resistance in the lever change as his weight redistributed, and she pushed harder, ignoring the pain in her shoulders and the cold that had climbed past her hips and was working on her core. The beam rode up along the paracord guide, the motorcycle shifted, and Mason pulled his leg free with a sound that was half grunt and half something he hadn't meant anyone to hear. She let the lever down slowly, controlled, and the motorcycle settled back into a new position that no longer mattered. Mason was already trying to stand. His left leg didn't cooperate. It buckled at the ankle, and he caught himself against the wall with both hands. Don't, she said, and moved to him. She got into the water beside him and put her shoulder under his arm. He was significantly larger than her. She estimated 240, maybe more. And the thought that this was going to be physically complicated crossed her mind and then moved on, because complicated wasn't the same as impossible. She assessed the ankle first, which meant getting her hands on it in the water, and Mason made a sound through his teeth but didn't pull away. It's not broken, she said. The fibula might be fractured. The soft tissue is the bigger problem right now. Can you bear any weight? Some. Not a lot. Enough to get to the ledge? Yeah. They moved to the maintenance ledge 18 inches above the current water level, which was still rising. Getting Mason up onto it required a kind of improvised team effort that involved her bracing from below and him doing most of the actual work while she directed his non-functional leg. He made it. Then he reached back down and pulled her up beside him with one hand, a gesture so automatic she almost didn't register it. She registered it. They sat on the ledge in the dark. Her headlamp was the only light, and Haley started on the splint while Mason caught his breath. She worked from what she had: broken boards from the debris, strips of fabric torn from the lower portion of her coat, the paracord as a supplemental brace. She built the splint the way she'd been trained, checking circulation and sensation twice during the process. Where did you learn to do that? Mason said, and his voice had changed again. Earlier, there had been authority in it. Now there was something else, not suspicion exactly, but the quality of a person who is revising their initial read of a situation. I studied emergency medicine for a while, she said. For a while? Yeah. And you're living under the overpass? She didn't answer. The splint was almost done. I'm not asking to be cruel, he said. And she believed him, which was unusual. She hadn't believed many people in 11 months. I'm asking because a person who has your skills and ends up where you are, that's not a thing that happens by accident. No, she said quietly. It's not. She tied off the last binding and sat back. The water below the ledge was still rising. She could hear it gaining speed somewhere in the tunnel system, and the gasoline smell had thickened to a point where she was consciously keeping her breathing shallow. We need to get above this if we can't get out, she said. There's a ladder access point, Mason said. About 60 feet east. Emergency maintenance hatch. I found it when I first came in. He paused. I couldn't get to it with my leg. She looked east, along the ledge. It was narrow barely enough to walk single file, but it was continuous. You want to try? With you navigating and me hopping on one leg? He looked at her steadily. Yeah, I want to try. They moved east along the ledge. She went ahead, testing each section before letting Mason follow. And he moved with a focused economy that she could see was costing him something real, every placement of his good foot deliberate. The injured leg held at an angle that cleared the wall. His breathing controlled in a way that she recognized from her training as a specific and disciplined response to pain. The water below them had reached the ledge's edge by the time they found the ladder. It came through in a rush, not a wave, just a sudden rise. The channel upstream, having cleared some obstruction and sent its stored volume down in one fast pulse. She felt it touch her boot, and then Mason grabbed her arm and lifted. Not panic, but fast and sure. And she got a hand on the ladder's lowest rung and pulled herself up, and then reached back, and they worked together without speaking, because there wasn't time for speech, and they both knew it. They were 4 rungs up when the water found the level of the ledge below them and kept going. Mason held position on the ladder above her, his injured leg wedged against the rungs to take some of the weight, and Haley held position below him, and they both stayed very still in the way you stay still when the thing you're afraid of is below you, and movement seems like a provocation. The water leveled out, stopped rising. Mason exhaled, long and slow, through his nose. "That was close," he said. "Yeah." A pause. "Haley." "Yeah. Thank you." She didn't say "you're welcome" because it felt like the wrong response to something she couldn't fully put into language. She had not chosen to come in here for gratitude. She wasn't sure what she had chosen it for, except that there had been no other option that she could live with. "How long until someone comes looking for you?" she asked instead. "Cole will have people out at first light. Maybe earlier. I've been gone since 1. He'll know something's wrong." Cole, chapter president. "He worries." Mason said it with the fondness of someone who finds another person's concern for them slightly exasperating and completely irreplaceable. "He's not going to like this. Getting stuck in a drainage tunnel, getting rescued by a woman half my size who I'm going to have to explain to everyone I know." This time she did almost smile. The impulse surprised her. The sound came about 20 minutes later. Motorcycles. Not 1, not 2, 3, arriving fast and then cutting to idle somewhere above them. Voices. She couldn't make out words, but she could hear the urgency in the tones. The kind of urgency that happens when people who care about someone arrive where they expected to find a person and find an absence instead. Then flashlights, bright ones, powerful, sweeping down through the gap at the eastern maintenance hatch above them. A voice. Rough, direct. The voice of a man who was working hard to keep something level that wanted to be a lot less level. "Mason. You down there?" "Yeah," Mason called up. "Both of us. A beat. Both of you. There's a woman with me. She got me out. Her name is Haley." Silence from above. Then the sound of the hatch being worked. It was stiff, and she could hear 2 sets of hands on it. And then it swung open with a groan of metal, and the gray pre-dawn sky was suddenly there, real and cold and exactly what she'd needed to see. 3 men descended. She clocked them in the order they appeared. First, a man in his mid-40s with the build of someone who had once been lean and was now just solid. Gray-streaked hair under a bandana, eyes that swept the situation in one practiced pass and landed on Mason with a relief so intense it bordered on visible pain. That was the one Mason had called Cole. Second, a larger man, older, with a gray beard, and the particular stillness of someone who moved slow on purpose and fast when it mattered. He went immediately to Mason's leg and started talking quietly. Technically, the way you talk when you know what you're looking at. Third, a leaner man with sharp, watchful eyes and no expression she could read, who positioned himself in a way that covered the ladder and the ledge at the same time and watched Haley without any particular aggression and without any particular welcome. Cole looked at her. "You got him out." "Mostly him," she said. "He pulled himself up the ladder." "The splint," the older man said. "Ray, she would learn later. You did this." "Yes." Ray looked at Mason. "She know what she's doing?" "She knew what she was doing before I knew what I was doing," Mason said. Cole was still looking at her, not with hostility, with that specific quality of attention that belongs to people who have learned to read situations fast because their lives have periodically depended on it. She stood still and let him look, which was the right call. Pushing back against that kind of assessment always made things worse. "Where are you staying?" he asked. She could hear what he was actually asking, which was not a question about lodging. "Around," she said. "Around," he repeated. "North Embankment." "I've been here about 11 months. Something moved in his face. She couldn't read it precisely. But it wasn't the judgment she'd expected, the particular kind of social contempt that got directed at people like her so automatically that most people who deployed it didn't even notice they were doing it. This was something else. Something that looked, unexpectedly, like recognition. He reached past her, not toward her, past her, and picked up her backpack from where she'd set it on the ledge to work on Mason. He wasn't going to search it. He was handing it to her. But as he lifted it, the top flap fell open. She hadn't fully secured the clasp when she'd come in, and the inner compartment gaped. And the canvas pouch that held the embroidered patch slid partially out, and the patch itself came partially free. A silver hawk flying over a mountain. The initials DM in neat block letters beneath it. Cole went completely still. Not the stillness of someone pausing to think. The stillness of someone who has just been hit with something they weren't prepared for and is working very hard not to let that show. Ray, still crouched beside Mason, looked up. He saw the patch. His expression did something complicated. The third man, Travis, took one step forward from his position at the ladder and stopped. The three of them looked at each other. Some communication moved between them that had no words. Haley saw it all. She had always been very good at seeing things. That patch, Cole said. His voice had changed. The control was still there, but it was working harder than it had been 30 seconds ago. Where did you get that patch? She looked at him. She looked at all three of them in turn. Cole's barely managed stillness, Ray's complicated expression, Travis's unreadable watch. She had kept this answer locked for 11 months. Had rehearsed 100 ways to say it and 100 reasons not to say it at all. Had made a policy of it: never volunteer information, never give anyone a thread they could pull. She looked at Mason, who was watching her from the ladder with eyes that had gone very quiet. Then she reached into the canvas pouch and closed it and looked back at Cole. Daniel Monroe was my father, she said, but everyone who knew that name abandoned me. The silence in the tunnel was absolute. The water moved below them. Quiet now, the rush passed. Gray light came through the open hatch above, and three men who had not expected to find anything beneath this overpass on a November morning stood very still and looked at a young woman with a dirty coat and worn boots and a first aid kit that no ordinary homeless person would carry, and understood, each of them in his own way, that the morning had just changed into something none of them had any map for. Cole didn't move for a long moment. He just stood there with the backpack still in his hands and the canvas pouch resting open against his palm, and the silver hawk on that patch staring up at him like something he had buried a long time ago and was not prepared to see walking around above ground. Then he set the backpack down carefully, deliberately, the way a man handles something fragile when his hands aren't entirely steady. Say that again, he said. Haley looked at him. You heard me the first time. I heard you. I want to make sure I heard you right. Daniel Monroe. My father. He left the club before I was born. She kept her voice flat, not because she felt flat. She felt something moving in her chest that she hadn't felt in a long time and didn't have a clean name for, but because she had learned that showing emotion in front of strangers was a form of debt. People used what you showed them. My mother was Rebecca Monroe. They lived in Silver Creek until he died. I grew up here. Cole looked at Ray. Ray had stopped working on Mason's leg. He was sitting back on his heels with his hands on his knees, and his expression was the expression of a man who has just watched a wall fall down in a direction he did not expect. Danny had a daughter, Ray said. It wasn't a question. It was a man working out something out loud that he should have known years ago and didn't. He had a daughter. Cole confirmed, and his voice had gone very quiet. The loudness he'd used in the tunnel, that carrying, authoritative projection, was completely gone. He sounded like someone talking in a room where a serious thing had just happened. Travis, at the ladder, hadn't moved or spoken. He was watching Haley with that unreadable expression, and Haley watched him back with the steady attention of someone who has learned that the quiet ones in a group are often the ones you need to worry about and the ones you most need to understand. How old are you? Cole asked. 22. And you've been living under that overpass for 11 months. Yes. Why? He asked it without accusation. Not why are you lazy? Not why don't you just get a job? Those questions had been asked of her before, by people who thought the answer would be simple and satisfying. This was a different question. This was, why did someone who is clearly not a person who ends up here end up here? She looked at him for a moment. She thought about the short version and the long version and all the versions in between. And she weighed what she knew about these men, which was not very much, which was the problem, against what she needed from them, which was nothing she was prepared to admit. That's a long answer, she said. I've got time. Mason needs a doctor. Mason, still on the ladder, moved. He came down the last 2 rungs, tested his splinted leg with careful weight, and said, I've been waiting 4 hours. A few more minutes won't kill me. He looked at Haley. You can tell them. She looked at him. You came into a flooding tunnel for me, Mason said, at 5 in the morning. In November. You didn't know me. I want to know why Daniel Monroe's daughter is sleeping under a railway overpass in the town he was born in. And I think you've been waiting 11 months for someone to ask you that question the right way. The silence stretched. The gray light through the open hatch was getting stronger. Dawn was fully arriving now, slow and cold and indifferent. And somewhere above them, Silver Creek was waking up and going about its business without any idea that anything in the world had changed. Haley thought about the last 11 months. She thought about the hours she had spent rehearsing explanations she never gave to anyone because there was never anyone worth giving them to. She thought about her mother's face in the hospital at the end, when Rebecca Monroe had looked at her daughter and said, I'm sorry I couldn't fix it. And Haley had held her hand and said, You didn't break it, Mom. It's not yours to fix. She said, My mother worked for the Silver Creek Veterans Housing Foundation. I started volunteering there when I was in school. I found discrepancies in the account's money, going to organizations that didn't exist, housing payments logged for properties that were vacant, emergency grants that veterans never received. She paused. I reported it to the director. Warren Pike, Mason said. She looked at him sharply. You know him. I know of him. Go ahead. Pike accused me of stealing donation money. He had documentation, electronic records, a security video, witness statements from 3 staff members. She let a beat pass. All of it was fabricated. I didn't know that at the time. I just knew it was wrong. And I couldn't prove it was wrong. And that distinction turns out not to matter very much when a man like Pike decides he wants you gone. Cole's jaw was tight. What happened to your scholarship? Gone. Within a week. The school received copies of the same fraudulent records. They didn't have a choice. Legally, or they decided they didn't. She kept her voice level. I lost my apartment because my income was gone. I lost my references because my name was in the news attached to the word theft. I lost my medical training placement because the clinic couldn't take the liability of keeping someone under criminal investigation on their staff. She looked at her hands for a moment, then back at Cole. I wasn't under criminal investigation for very long. The DA looked at the evidence and decided there wasn't enough to prosecute. But by then the damage was done. The internet has a very long memory, and employers have a very low tolerance for ambiguity. And your mother, Ray said quietly. Haley breathed in. Breathed out. She was sick. She had been sick for a while. She managed it when things were stable, and then things weren't stable. She stopped. She was not going to cry in front of 4 men she had met 20 minutes ago in a flooded drainage tunnel. She filed that possibility away firmly in a drawer marked not now. She died 8 months ago. I had been on the street for 3 months by then. The tunnel was very quiet. Cole moved first. He didn't say anything. He just reached out and picked up her backpack and put the strap over her shoulder. Carefully, the way you hand someone something that belongs to them. Then he said, We're getting Mason to a clinic. You're coming with us. You're coming with us, he said again. And it wasn't a threat and it wasn't a plea. It was simply a statement about how things were going to go. You can decide everything else later. Right now you're coming. She looked at Mason. Mason shrugged, which pulled at something in his side that he'd been trying not to let on about. And he made a deep face and she said, You've got a rib issue. It's nothing. It's a probable fracture. Don't shrug. Yes, ma'am, he said, in a tone that was 2 degrees away from actually being respectful and 1 degree away from being amused. And she grabbed her backpack from Cole and went up the ladder first and out into the cold November morning. and stood on solid ground for the first time in hours. The three motorcycles were parked 30 feet from the hatch, and the sight of them hit her in a way she hadn't anticipated, not the bikes themselves, but the patches on the jackets hanging from the handlebars. The same patch she had carried in the canvas pouch for 22 years. The hawk and the mountain and the letters that were different letters, but the same shape, the same organization, the same world her father had left before she was born. She breathed through it, filed that drawer too. The clinic Cole took them to was not a hospital. It was a small independent practice on the east side of Silver Creek, a two-room building attached to a larger garage, the kind of place that had been a family doctor's office for 40 years before the family doctor retired and his son turned half of it into a vehicle inspection station. The remaining medical half was staffed by a woman named Dr. Petra Voss, who was in her 60s and had the particular manner of someone who had seen a great deal and retained the ability to be surprised by very little of it. She looked at Haley's splint on Mason's ankle, looked at Mason, looked at Haley. "Did you do this?" she asked Haley. "Yes." "Where did you train?" "Silver Creek Community College Emergency Medicine Program. I completed 2 years." Dr. Voss nodded once, the nod of a person filing information in the correct drawer. "It's good work. The circulation check especially." She moved past that without ceremony and started on Mason's examination. And Haley stood against the wall and felt the warmth of the room work its way into her hands and feet and tried not to let the relief of it show too much. Cole came and stood next to her. "I want to explain something," he said. "You don't owe me any explanations." "I know I don't." He was quiet for a moment. "After Danny died, after the crash, we tried to find out if he had family. We knew about Rebecca. We didn't know about you yet, he hadn't told us. And we've thought about why. And I think the honest answer is that he was protecting you. He knew things were getting complicated, and he didn't want that complication to touch you." Haley was looking at the wall, not avoiding him processing. "We sent someone to find Rebecca," Cole continued. "This was maybe 2 months after the accident. We got word back that she and her daughter had both died. A car accident out of state." He paused. "The paperwork looked right. We had no reason to question it." The words landed in a specific way. Not softly, words like that don't land softly, but with the particular weight of something that explains a long, cold absence without making it better or worse. Just real. "Someone sent you that information deliberately," she said. "That's what I think now, Pike. That's what I think now," he said again. "Yes." She turned and looked at him. "My father knew what Pike was doing. Before he died, he knew." Cole met her eyes. "He did. He tried to tell you." A pause, a real one, with something in it. "He tried to tell me. I didn't listen the way I should have. I thought he was—" Cole stopped. "I thought he was seeing something that wasn't there. Danny had a tendency to look for the angle on things. I told him he was too suspicious, that Pike was legitimate, that the charity work was clean. He looked at Mason's leg on the examination table. I told him to let it go." The silence between them had a weight to it now that hadn't been there before. Not accusation. She wasn't angry at Cole, not for that. People believed what they were given reason to believe. And she had learned that lesson from the other direction, from being the person that nobody believed. But the silence was real, and she let it be real. "A week later, he was dead," Cole said. "Yes," she said, "he was." Mason was watching them from the table. Dr. Voss was working on his ribs now, and he had his hands on his knees and the focused breathing of controlled discomfort. But his eyes were on Cole and Haley, and whatever he was reading in the exchange was making something move behind his expression that wasn't quite readable yet. Ray came through the door from outside. He'd been on the phone. She had heard him talking. The low, serious murmur of someone passing information rather than receiving it. He looked at Cole. "Someone's been in the impound yard," he said. Cole turned. "When? Sometime last night. Mason's bike, they moved it." "Moved it where?" "That's the thing. Nobody knows. It was logged in at 11 p.m. By this morning it was gone." He let that sit for a second. "The log shows it as released to the owner. Mason wasn't there to release it." The room went very quiet. Haley felt something shift in her chest. Not surprised, she knew the shape of this. had felt it before. The particular way a system rearranges itself around evidence when evidence becomes a problem. She had watched it happen to her own records 18 months ago. She knew what it felt like from the inside. "What was on the bike?" she asked. Mason looked at her. "Documents, I had them in the saddlebag. A retired veteran named Carl Whitfield. He's been trying to get someone to listen to him about the foundation for 2 years. He gave me everything he had. Financial records, correspondence, a recorded phone call. And now it's gone," Travis said from the doorway. He had the quality of a man who waits for the moment, when silence has finished doing its work before he speaks. And this was apparently that moment. Which means someone knows Mason was carrying it. Which means someone knows why he was out last night. Which means Mason's crash wasn't an accident. Nobody argued with this. The math was too clean. Haley looked down at her hands. They had stopped shaking. They'd stopped shaking somewhere around the time she was calculating the lever angle as flooding tunnel. But she could feel the steadiness in them the way you feel scar tissue, something that is strength now and pain's evidence at the same time. "They're going to come here," she said. "Not if. When." Cole looked at her. "What makes you say that?" "Because they moved fast. The bike was gone by morning. That's fast. That's someone who already knew what was happening and was moving to contain it. They're not waiting to see what happens. They're already managing." She paused. "And if someone told you I was dead to keep you from looking for me, and I just showed up alive in the middle of this, they're going to want to know that." The room thought about this. "She's right," Mason said from the table. Cole crossed his arms. He looked at Haley with the expression of a man who is revising a series of assumptions in real time. "You know this pattern." "I've been inside it," she said. "It doesn't look the same from the outside." Travis stepped fully into the room. He had something in his hand, his phone, turned to face outward. On the screen was a text message. He held it out so Haley could read it. She read it. "Run again, or the bikers will learn what you really did." The cold that moved through her was a different kind of cold than the water in the tunnel. That had been physical, manageable, a problem with solutions. This was the cold of a familiar thing, arriving in a new place, the knowledge that whatever brief safety the morning had offered was already compromised. "When did you get that?" she asked Travis. "It was forwarded to me from a number I didn't recognize. 30 minutes ago." He took the phone back. "It was sent to you first. Your number, the one registered to a prepaid card. Someone has been watching it." She hadn't given anyone that number. She hadn't given anyone anything. That was the point of the prepaid card. It existed in the gap between her legal identity and her physical presence, a line that was supposed to be invisible. The fact that it wasn't invisible anymore told her exactly what kind of resources were being deployed. "I need to go," she said. She said it without drama, without heat. She reached for her backpack. Mason said, "No." She looked at him. "No," he said again. And there was something in the word that was different from the firmness he'd used in the tunnel. In the tunnel, he'd been trying to protect her. This was something else. This was a man who had decided something. "Sit down." She didn't sit down, but she stopped reaching for the backpack. Cole moved to the door and stood there, not blocking it. She noted. Not standing between her and the exit. Just present, a fixed point in the room. "Someone fabricated a death notice for you and your mother. Someone has been tracking your phone. Someone moved evidence from a police impound yard in one night." He looked at her steadily. "You think running is going to solve any of that? Running is going to keep you out of whatever this is." "We're already in it," Ray said. Mason's bike was sabotaged. He almost drowned in that tunnel. "You think that's not our business?" "I think I brought this here," she said. "I think I've been in Silver Creek for 11 months, and I thought I was being careful, and I wasn't careful enough. And now someone knows I'm talking to you, and they're going to make that a problem." "Let them," Travis said. She looked at him. It was the most he'd said. "Let them," he said again, "because now they've got a problem too. They moved evidence. They had Mason's bike sabotaged. They've been illegally tracking your phone. That's not a small operation to keep quiet. And the more they move, the more they touch, the more they leave." He put his phone in his pocket. "I want them to move." The silence that followed was different from the other silences. This one had a shape to it, the shape of people in a room, arriving at the same point from different directions and recognizing each other when they get there. Mason leaned forward from the table. We need to talk about what you know. The accounting irregularities, everything you found before Pike came after you. Do you still have any of it? She looked at him for a long moment. I have everything I found, she said. I kept copies of every document I flagged, every email I sent, every record I photographed. I have them on a drive. She paused. I've been carrying it in my backpack for 11 months. Ray made a sound that was almost a laugh. Of course she has. I didn't know what to do with it, she said. And there was something under the practicality of that statement that she didn't fully let into her voice, the particular loneliness of carrying proof that nobody wants to see. I'd already tried the official channels. I tried the foundation's board. I tried the city administrator's office. I tried a legal aid clinic. Every time, the documentation I presented was either dismissed or somehow ended up back with Pike's people before I could follow up. I stopped trying to give it to institutions. Because the institutions were compromised, Cole said. Because I couldn't tell which ones were, she said, which is the same thing in practice. Cole nodded. Slowly. Okay. He looked at Ray and Travis, and then at Mason. We're doing this differently. Differently how? Ray asked. She's not running. We're not turning this over to a county office or a city board or anyone else that Pike has had 20 years to work on. He looked at Haley. Do you trust us? She thought about the question seriously, the way it deserved to be thought about. She thought about a man asking her to leave him in a flooding tunnel. She thought about the way Cole had handed her backpack back to her without searching it. She thought about the text message on Travis' phone and the fact that he'd shown it to her first instead of discussing it with the others while she wasn't in the room. I trust that you have a reason to want the same thing I want, she said. That's as far as I can go right now. Cole took that without offense. That's enough for right now. He looked at Mason. You're staying off your feet for 48 hours. I'm not. 48 hours. Mason. Mason looked at the ceiling. Fine. 48 hours. Cole looked at Haley. There's a room above the repair shop. It has a real bed and a working heater and a lock on the door. The key is yours. Nobody comes in without your say. He paused. I'll put that in writing if you want. She almost said no. The instinct was so deep and automatic by now that refusal was the default, not rudeness, just survival. Every offer of shelter in the past 11 months had come with a cost that wasn't stated at the beginning, and the unstated costs were always higher than the stated ones. But she looked at Mason, who was watching her with the steady patience of a man who had already offered everything he had in a flooding tunnel and was prepared to wait for her to do the math. In writing, she said. Cole almost smiled. In writing, he said. It was Ray who produced paper and a pen from somewhere on his person. Ray, she would learn, was the kind of man who had whatever was needed in whatever pocket was appropriate, the result of 40 years of working with his hands and knowing that the right tool at the right moment was not a luxury. And Cole wrote out a short, plain statement. No one would access her belongings. No one would contact authorities without her explicit consent. No one would enter the room without her invitation. He signed it and dated it. He handed it to her. She read it twice. She folded it and put it in the waterproof sleeve with her birth certificate and her state ID and the two letters. She had kept it because they were proof that someone had once believed she was worth something. Okay, she said. She rode to the repair shop behind Travis on the third motorcycle. She had not been on a motorcycle since she was 7 years old. Sitting in front of her father on an early morning ride she could still feel in her body when she tried the vibration of the engine, his arms around her, the smell of leather, and cold air. She had not let herself think about that memory in a long time because it sat right next to other memories that still had edges. She thought about it now, briefly, and let herself. The room above the repair shop was small and warm and clean. There was a bed with blankets that had been recently washed. There was a lamp. There was a window with a lock. The key was on a hook by the door, and Cole set it in her hand and stepped back and waited for her to test the lock from the inside, which she did. and he waited on the other side until she unlocked it again to confirm that the mechanism worked. Then he left. She sat on the edge of the bed. She did not unpack. She kept her backpack on her shoulder for another 20 minutes before she finally set it down. And even then, she set it where she could reach it without standing. She thought about what Cole had said. Someone had sent them a forged death notice. She and her mother, dead in a car accident, 2 months after her father was killed on a highway that she had driven past 100 times and never once been able to look at directly. Whoever had silenced her father had then quietly erased his family. Not through violence, through paperwork. Through the particular bureaucratic violence of false documentation, which left no body and no blood but accomplished the same thing. It took away the people who might ask questions. It took away the people who might keep looking. It had almost worked. She pulled the canvas pouch from her backpack and took out the embroidered patch for the first time in daylight, in months, and held it in both hands. The Silver Hawk, the mountain, the initials DM in block letters that her mother had stitched with the careful, slow attention of someone making a thing that was supposed to last. Her father had worn this. He had carried it through years she would never be old enough to know. He had left the world he shared with these men to give her a quieter life. And somebody had made sure that life was taken apart piece by piece. And then somebody had told the men who might have looked for her that she was already gone. She thought about Mason in the tunnel, ordering her to leave with the particular authority of a man who was trying to protect someone he didn't know. She thought about Cole's face when the patch came into view. She thought about the text message on Travis's phone. Run again, or the bikers will learn what you really did. Someone was watching. Someone was sending messages. Someone had moved quickly enough to pull evidence from a police impound yard in a single night. That was not the behavior of a person who felt secure. She put the patch away and opened the drive, small, black, the size of her thumbnail, and plugged it into the old laptop that Ray had, without announcement, left on the table beside the lamp. She hadn't asked for it. He had seen what she needed and provided it without making it a transaction. The files opened. Hundreds of them. Receipts, ledgers, correspondence, photographs, timestamps. 11 months of protection for a story she had not yet been able to tell. Her phone buzzed. Unknown number. No text, just a photo. It was the repair shop, taken from outside within the last hour. The angle included the window of the room where she was sitting. Her hands were steady. She had learned to keep them steady. She thought about Travis, saying, "Let them move." She thought about what movement looked like from the outside when you were the one who had set it in motion. Then she opened a new document on the laptop and began to write out what she knew. From the beginning, in the order it had happened, with every date and name and number she could recall. Not for herself, she had carried all of it in her head for 11 months. For the people in this building who were going to need to understand the shape of what they were walking into. Outside, she heard the repair shop below come to life, the sound of tools, the low conversation of men who worked with their hands, the ordinary sounds of a place that did real work. Ordinary sounds, doing their ordinary job of making a space feel inhabited and safe. She wrote. The morning moved forward around her. And somewhere in Silver Creek, someone who had spent a year and a half believing she had nowhere left to go was about to because she had found exactly where she was supposed to be. The document Haley had written through the night ran to 41 pages by the time the repair shop below her went quiet again around 2 in the morning. She hadn't planned for 41 pages. She had planned for a summary, something clean and organized that would give Cole and the others what they needed without requiring her to revisit the whole thing in detail. But once she started writing, she couldn't find a place to stop that felt honest. And so she kept going, and the 41 pages were what honesty cost. She printed it on the small printer Ray had left beside the laptop without comment, the same way he had left the laptop appearing as needed, without announcement or transaction. She read the printed version once, made 3 corrections with a pen, and left it on the table. Then she sat on the edge of the bed and did not sleep. At 6 in the morning, she heard Mason's voice below. He was arguing with someone she recognized. Ray's lower responses about whether 48 hours off his feet was a medical requirement or a suggestion. Ray's position, as far as she could tell through the floor, was that it was a requirement. Mason's position was that requirements needed to make themselves more reasonable. She went downstairs. Mason was sitting at the workbench with his splinted leg propped on a second stool, a cup of coffee in his hand, and the expression of a man who has lost an argument and is maintaining dignity through sheer stubbornness. Ray was at the other end of the bench, reading something on his phone. Travis was at the far wall, doing something mechanical to an engine component that she couldn't identify from the doorway. Cole was reading the 41 pages. He was standing at the center workbench with the pages in his hands, and he had not looked up when she came down the stairs, and he didn't look up now. He was reading the way people read when they're not skimming slowly, with the full weight of his attention on each line, the kind of reading that costs something. Mason looked at her. Coffee's on the left side of the bench. Cups are the shelf above it. She got coffee. She stood and drank it and waited. Cole turned the last page. He stood there for a moment with the document in his hands, not moving, and the quality of his stillness was different from the stillness in the tunnel. That had been shock. This was something older and heavier. He looked up. "Your father sent me a letter," he said. 3 days before he died. I got it the week after the funeral. I read it, and I told myself he was being paranoid. That grief was doing things to his judgment. He set the pages down on the workbench with the careful deliberateness of a man handling evidence. He named Pike specifically. He named 3 of the shell companies. He said he had documents hidden and that he had left directions for finding them. The room was completely still. "You never told us that," Travis said from the far wall. He had stopped working. His voice was quiet. "No," Cole said. "I didn't." "Why not?" Cole looked at the workbench. "Because 2 weeks later I got the notice that Rebecca and her daughter were dead. And He stopped. "I decided that pursuing it would only put more people in danger. That whatever Danny had found, it wasn't worth more lives." Ray put his phone down. "You were protecting people." "I was telling myself I was protecting people," Cole said, and the distinction in his voice was the distinction of a man who had been having this argument with himself for 16 years and was finally saying the losing side out loud. He looked at Haley. "I was protecting myself from being wrong about something I should have listened to when it mattered." Haley looked at him for a moment. She thought about saying something that would make it easier for him, and then this that making it easier was not what either of them needed. "He said he left directions," she said. "What kind of directions?" Cole looked at her. "In the letter, he said if anything happened to him, the answers were in the Hawk." "The Hawk." She set down her coffee cup. She went back upstairs faster than she meant to, not running but close to it, and came back down with the canvas pouch and the embroidered patch. She put it on the workbench under the bright lights in the shop, which Mason swung over without being asked. The Silver Hawk, flying over the mountain, DM beneath it in block letters. She had looked at this patch her entire life. She had memorized it the way you memorize your own face, not by studying it, but by simple repeated exposure, until the details became invisible through familiarity. She made herself look at it the way she looked at the accounting documents, not as a memory, as a source. The stitching on the Hawk's body was her mother's. She knew her mother's work, the tight, even pull of someone who had learned to embroider as a girl and never lost the habit. The mountain beneath it was her mother's too. The letters D, M were even and square and precise, also her mother's. But the border, the outer border of the patch, the decorative edging that ran around the entire circumference, that was different thread, different tension, slightly different color that she had always attributed to fading or a different dye lot. She had never asked her mother about the border. She picked up the patch and felt it between her fingers, pressing gently around the border, and found it. One section of the edging, along the bottom right, was slightly raised. Not fraying raised, from the inside. Something thin and flat stitched between the layers of the patch. "Travis," she said, Do you have a seam ripper? Travis appeared beside her. She hadn't heard him move and produced one from a pocket with the same quiet efficiency that characterized everything he did. She worked carefully along the border stitching. And every person in the room had stopped breathing at approximately the same moment, and when the section came open, she reached in with 2 fingers and drew out what was inside. A strip of paper, folded 4 times thin as onion skin, with her father's handwriting on it in pencil, so fine it was almost invisible. Maintenance log records. Mountain Rescue Station, Route 7, mile marker 31. Storage room B, behind the red panel box. Below that, a date. And below the date, 4 words, for my girl, always. Nobody said anything. She folded the paper back the way it had come and held it in her fist for exactly as long as she needed to. And then she put it on the workbench and said, how far is mile marker 31 on Route 7? Cole was already looking at his phone. 40 minutes, maybe 35 if the road's clear. It won't be clear, Mason said, and everyone looked at him. He was pointing at the window. Outside, the sky had gone the particular color that people who live in the mountains know before they know anything else. Storm coming down from the north. We've got maybe 3 hours before that road is impassable. Cole looked at Haley. Haley looked at the strip of paper on the workbench. She had spent 11 months carrying proof that nobody would receive and living inside a silence that everyone with power had agreed to maintain. Her father had spent the last days of his life hiding the truth in the one place. He knew she would eventually find it, in the object her mother had made, betting on the future with the particular faith of a man who refused to accept that he was already losing. 3 hours, she said. Then let's go. She rode with Cole this time. She didn't ask for it. He simply brought his bike alongside, and she got on behind him. And neither of them made it a conversation. The 2 other bikes fell in behind them, Mason's absence between them like a shape. He had tried to argue. Ray had said 4 words, you'll destroy that ankle, and Mason had stopped arguing and told them to bring everything back, and there was something in how he said it that made Haley look back once from the end of the street. He was still standing in the doorway of the repair shop, watching them go. The road up to the Mountain Rescue Station climbed through territory that got harder and colder with each mile. The kind of road that was maintained just enough to be passable and not 1 degree more. Cole drove with the focused efficiency of someone who knew this road well. And Haley noticed the way he took each curve not cautiously, not recklessly, but with the particular confidence of someone who has learned a thing so thoroughly that knowledge and instinct have merged into a single response. She thought about her father riding these same roads. She thought about what it felt like to belong to a world and then leave it, and whether you ever fully left or whether it stayed in your hands the way muscle memory stays even when the mind has moved on. Her phone buzzed. She checked it over Cole's shoulder. Another unknown number. No photo this time. Just text. You should have run when you had the chance. She put the phone in her pocket. Cole said over the wind, everything okay? Another message, she said. He didn't respond immediately. Then, they're watching. They've been watching since yesterday morning, she said. They probably know we're moving. Let them watch, he said, which was exactly what Travis had said 18 hours earlier. And she understood now that it wasn't bravado, it was strategy. People who are watching make decisions based on what they see. If what they see is movement, their decisions are reactive rather than planned. And reactive decisions leave traces. The Mountain Rescue Station had been decommissioned for 6 years. It was a square concrete structure with a metal roof, built to survive weather rather than to accommodate comfort, the kind of building that was indifferent to both storms and aesthetics. The lock on the main door was a padlock, and it had been through several seasons without maintenance, and Travis opened it in under 2 minutes with a tension wrench and pick that he produced from inside his jacket with no particular ceremony. Cole looked at him. Travis said, I know things. They went in. Storage room B was at the back of the building, past 2 larger rooms that smelled of old equipment and disuse. The red panel box was a circuit panel on the left wall, exactly where the note said it would be. Behind it, shimmed against the concrete, At the back of the recess were two sealed document boxes, the kind with a foam-lined lid and a waterproof gasket, the kind built for long-term preservation. They were not dusty. The room had protected them. Her father had prepared for this. He had found these boxes, sealed them properly, positioned them correctly, and then walked out of this building knowing he was leaving the truth here because he wasn't sure how much longer he would be able to carry it himself. And then a week later, a car had come out of nowhere on a clear highway and hit his motorcycle at a speed that left no explanation that satisfied anyone who looked too carefully. She was the one who moved first. She lifted the first box and set it on the room's central table, and her hands were steady, which she was grateful for in a way she couldn't have articulated. Cole broke the seal. Inside, original bank statements, organized by date, property deeds with names she recognized from her own research veterans whose housing claims had been redirected into false accounts. A stack of recorded interviews on cassette tape labeled in her father's hand. And at the bottom, wrapped in a Ziploc bag, a handheld recorder with a cassette still inside it. Travis turned it over, checked the battery compartment, and said, "I'll get batteries from the bikes." He was back in 90 seconds. He loaded the batteries, rewound the tape to the beginning, and pressed play. The sound quality was not perfect. There was a slight warble in the playback, years of storage affecting the tape, but the voice was perfectly clear. Daniel Monroe's voice. She had 4 recordings of it on her phone, saved from old family videos her mother had kept, and she knew it, the way she knew her own, the particular timbre, the pacing, the way he weighted certain words. He said, "This is Daniel Monroe, recording on," and gave a date 8 days before his death. "I am leaving this record because I have reason to believe I will not be able to deliver it in person." Warren Pike, director of the Silver Creek Veterans Housing Foundation, has been systematically diverting funds designated for veteran housing and medical assistance since at least 2008. I have documentation of 47 specific transactions, totaling in excess of $2 million, redirected through shell organizations that exist on paper only. I have personally been threatened twice. I was told by a man I believe to be employed by Pike that if I spoke to law enforcement, my family would be impacted. I am making this recording because I am more afraid of my silence than I am of what comes next. I am leaving it here because the person who will find it, a pause, long enough to feel intentional. The person who will find it is the only person I trust completely to know what to do with it. She's going to be angry that I hid this. She should be. She would have handled it better than me from the beginning. She handles everything better than me. Cole made a sound. Brief, low, involuntary. The recording continued for another 12 minutes, naming names, amounts, dates, location. It was methodical and precise, and it was the work of a man who understood he was building something that needed to hold up without him there to support it. When it ended, the room was so quiet that the wind outside was the loudest thing in it. Haley took the recorder from Travis's hand and stood holding it. Then the lights went out. Not a flicker off completely, the kind of deliberate cut that doesn't happen from a breaker trip. Travis moved first, which he was already learning was his pattern movement before assessment, position before analysis. He was at the door before the darkness had fully settled. "Someone cut the power," he said, from the doorway, very quietly. Cole was beside her. His hand found her arm, not grabbing, locating, making sure she was there. "The boxes," she said. "I've got them," he said. From outside came the sound of a vehicle. One, then two, then the particular silence of engines cut simultaneously, which was worse than the engines themselves because it meant people who had practiced coordination. Then fire. She smelled it before she saw the light of it under the storage room door, the oily, accelerant-assisted kind that moves fast and doesn't negotiate. "Storage room in the back has a window," Travis said. Still quietly still, with the particular economy of a man who never spends a word he doesn't need. "Ground level. Hinged outward," Cole said. Ray was already moving toward the window. He had the case of documents under one arm and was working the window latch with his other hand, and in the dark and smoke beginning to drift under the door, it was all happening simultaneously and fast. The way real emergencies happen, not dramatically, not cinematically, but with the brutal speed of a situation that will not wait for anyone to be ready. The window opened. Ray went through first with the boxes, landing outside with a grunt that meant the drop was harder than expected but manageable. Travis turned to Haley. "Go," he said. "I heard something in there," she said. "Someone in the main room, Haley. There's someone in the building." She pushed past him, back toward the main room. Cole said something sharp behind her that she heard as sound rather than words, and then she heard him following. The main room was filling with smoke from the storage corridor to the left, and the fire was moving faster than it should. Bugsfuzz, the person who said it, knew what they were doing. The heat was already present, not overwhelming, not yet, but real and directed and with intention behind it. Ray was at the window in the far corner of the main room. Not outside, he had come back through the main entrance, which meant he had heard her from outside and made his own decision about what to do with that information. He was on the floor. Something had come down a storage shelf unit, heavy steel, pulled loose from the wall by the heat warping the anchor bolts. The kind of equipment failure that happens fast and without warning. It had caught his right side, shoulder and upper arm, and he had one leg free and one leg pinned, and he was completely calm about it in the way of a very large, very experienced man who has decided that panic would be redundant. He looked at Haley and said, "There it is." She crouched beside him. The shelf unit was not as heavy as the motorcycle had been, but the angle was wrong. The floor was hot through her boots, and the smoke was dropping the visibility every 30 seconds. Cole was behind her. He didn't wait for instructions. He got his hands under the near end of the shelf and looked at her, and she nodded, and they lifted together. And Ray was pulling himself clear before they had the thing fully elevated, and he made a sound when his shoulder came into the load-bearing equation that he did not repeat, and then he was clear. She got under his good shoulder. He let her. That, she thought, was the measure of a man knowing when to accept help without making it mean something about weakness. Travis appeared in the main room entrance with a fire extinguisher from somewhere outside he had found it, assessed it as useful, and returned with it, all in the time it had taken them to free Ray, and he deployed it on the storage corridor fire with the same quiet efficiency he brought to everything, buying them 2 minutes that were enough to get through the main door and away from the building before the back portion was fully alight. They stood outside in the cold mountain air, coughing, with a sealed box of documents and a tape recorder, and the fact of a fire that had been deliberately set to destroy everything inside. "You came back," Cole said to Ray. Ray was holding his shoulder. "Obviously. You heard her." "I heard her say there was someone in the building." He looked at Haley. "Wasn't going to leave someone in a burning building who'd already gone back in for me." Travis had his phone out. No signal. He looked at the road. "They cut the power and blocked the road," he said. "There's a truck across it. 2 men by it. They're not approaching." "They're watching," Haley said. "They want to see if the fire did what they needed it to do." "They can see we got out," Cole said. "They can see we got out. They don't know what we got with us." She had the recorder in her jacket pocket. Cole had the document box. The evidence was intact, which meant this moment right now, standing outside a burning building with no signal and a blocked road, was the moment that mattered. She thought fast. The way she had thought in the tunnel, the way she had thought over the accounting records, the way her father had apparently thought in the days before he died. Fast and clear and without the luxury of hesitation. The station had an emergency radio. She had seen it mounted in the main room. It was battery-powered, designed to operate independently of the building's power supply, and it had been outside the path of the fire when they left. "It might still be operational." "The emergency radio," she said. "Is it salvageable?" Travis looked at the building. "Assessed. Maybe. The fire's in the back. Main room is still accessible if we move now." He went back in. Cole stared at the space Travis had just occupied. Ray said, "He does that." Travis was back in 90 seconds with the radio unit, which was slightly warm on the left side, but operational. She had the frequencies she needed. She had memorized them years ago as part of her emergency medicine training. the county rescue services, the regional federal communications relay, the volunteer fire network. She also had something Travis didn't know she was going to do with it, which was the contact number written on the back of a card inside her wallet, a federal investigator's direct frequency, found in her father's files, someone her father had been trying to reach before he ran out of time. She broadcast to all three simultaneously. She identified herself by name, her real name, her full name, without hesitation. And she stated Pike's name, and the foundation's name, and the location of the fire, and the blocked road, and the nature of the evidence she was carrying. She said it clearly. She said it once. She did not repeat herself because she had learned that repeating yourself gives the impression you're not sure you were heard, and she needed to sound like someone who was very sure. Then she lowered the radio and looked at the truck across the road. Two men standing beside it. At this distance, she couldn't read their expressions, but she could read their posture. And their posture had changed in the last 30 seconds from the relaxed watch of people who believed they were in control of a situation to the tenser stillness of people who have just realized something has shifted. Pike had bet that evidence on a mountain, combined with a fire and a blocked road, would be enough to end this. He had not accounted for a woman who had spent 11 months learning to work with what she had uttered. Cole's phone showed one bar of signal. He looked at it like it had personally surprised him and immediately called Mason. She could hear Mason's voice on the other end before Cole had finished his first sentence. Alert. Awake, not a man who had been resting. She handed Cole the recorder. He looked at her. Play it for him, she said. He needs to hear it. Cole put the phone on speaker and pressed play, and Daniel Monroe's voice came out into the cold mountain air, and Cole held the phone steady while he listened, again to words he should have heard 16 years ago, and his jaw worked once, but he didn't look away. The two men by the truck were on their phones now. She watched them. One of them made a gesture to the other sharp, directed, and they got back into the truck. They're leaving, Travis said. They're reporting, she said. They're telling him we got out with something and they don't know what, which meant Pike was about to make a decision. And that decision, whatever it was going to be made on incomplete information, which was exactly where she wanted him. County Rescue confirmed her call within 4 minutes. Federal Relay confirmed in 7. The Volunteer Fire Network arrived, first because they were closest, and the first truck up the mountain road had to squeeze past the departing black truck going down, and one of the volunteers wrote down the plate number without being asked, because that was the kind of person who volunteers for mountain rescue. She stood beside Cole while the investigators and rescue personnel moved around them. And for the first time since this morning, she let herself breathe without calculating what the breath was going to cost. And then Cole said quietly, so only she could hear, he was right about you, you know. She looked at him. Your father. He said you'd handle it better. He wasn't looking at her, he was watching the building, where the fire was being brought under control now. The back portion still burning, but the main room saved. He was right. She didn't answer for a moment. She was thinking about her father leaving a message for her inside a patch her mother had stitched, and trusting that the thread between them was strong enough to survive years and silence and whatever came between. It had been strong enough. But the thing she was thinking about most, the thing that was sitting at the front of her mind in a way she couldn't set aside, was the photograph on Travis's phone from the day before. The repair shop, taken from outside, within the last hour of her arrival. She knew what that meant. She had known since she saw it. Someone hadn't just been watching her. Someone had been tracking her for long enough to know she was in Silver Creek before yesterday morning. Long enough to know her phone number. Long enough to know which overpass she was sleeping under. Which meant that Mason's crash and her proximity to it were not a coincidence. She had not been found by accident. She had been found on purpose. She turned that over in her mind and let it settle into its full shape. And when it settled, she understood something she had not fully understood yet, that she was not a bystander in this story who had wandered into the frame. She had been watched and monitored, and at some point, deliberately positioned near Mason's route that night. Someone had wanted her in that tunnel. Someone had expected her to either die with Mason or be so thoroughly implicated in the scene that whatever she was carrying would become worthless. What they had not expected was that she would get him out. What they had not expected was the patch, or Cole's recognition of it, or what recognition would set in motion. She looked at the mountain road where the black truck had gone down. She looked at the document box in Cole's hands, and the recorder in her pocket, and the radio on the ground. Pike thought he was managing a situation. He had been managing situations for 20 years without anyone managing back. That was about to change. She took out her phone one bar, the same single bar Cole's phone had found, and she opened the photo the unknown number had sent her. The repair shop. Her window visible. The angle clear. She screen captured it. She noted the timestamp. She forwarded it to Cole's number. Then she looked at Ray, who was sitting on the running board of the rescue truck while a paramedic assessed his shoulder, and who looked up at exactly the right moment. "How's the shoulder?" she asked. "Adequate," he said, which she was learning was Ray's version of fine. "Good." She looked back at the mountain road. "We're not done." Ray studied her for a moment. Then he said, "No," with the settled certainty of a man who has been in enough rooms to know when a thing is finished and when it is only beginning. "We're not." The drive back down the mountain took 40 minutes because the storm had arrived ahead of schedule, and the road was already working against them. And Haley spent those 40 minutes thinking about the word positioned. She had been positioned. She turned it over the way you turn over a stone to look at what lives underneath it. And the more she looked, the more she found. The prepaid phone number, someone had that number, which meant someone had been tracking her purchases, her movements, the small transactions she made in cash at corner stores and gas stations. The photograph of the repair shop taken within hours of her arrival, that was not opportunistic surveillance. That was pre-positioned surveillance, a camera or a person already in place, waiting. And Mason's route the night of his crash had taken him directly past the north embankment of the Burlington Northern Overpass. She had been awake. She always heard motorcycles. Whoever had planned Mason's accident had known she was there, had known she would hear him if he cried out from the drainage tunnel, had known or gambled that she would go in. The question she was still working on was whether they had gambled that she would die with him or gambled that she would survive and be implicated. Either outcome served Pike's purposes. A dead homeless woman in a flooding tunnel with a trapped Hells Angels rider was a local tragedy with no investigative thread. A homeless woman with a theft record found at the scene of an injured man and a pile of disturbed evidence was a different story with the same ending. What nobody had planned for was the patch. What nobody had planned for was Cole. She told them in the repair shop when they got back, all five of them, Cole, Ray, Travis, and Mason, who was exactly where they had left him and whose expression when they came through the door made clear that the 48 hours off his feet had been, in practice, spent sitting upright at the workbench tracking everything he could find on his phone. She told them about the positioning, about the calculations she believed had been made. She laid it out in the same clear, methodical way she had learned from her emergency medicine training. Identify the known facts. Identify the inferences. Mark the boundary between them clearly. When she finished, the room was quiet. Mason spoke first. "They knew you were there." "Yes. They knew you'd hear me. That's my read. And they thought either you'd die in there with me, or you'd be found at the scene, and the homeless girl with the theft record becomes the story instead of the evidence I was carrying." He was quiet for a moment. "They didn't know about the patch." "Nobody knew about the patch except my mother and me," she said. "And my mother died 8 months ago." Cole was at the far end of the workbench. He had not sat down since they came back in. He was standing with his arms crossed and his weight on his back foot, which Haley had come to recognize as his thinking posture, not defensive. Just how he organized himself when the problem was large enough to require organizing. "Pike built this over 20 years, Cole said. "He has people in the county administrator's office, people in the police department. We don't know how far that goes." We go to the wrong person with what we have, the evidence disappears, and we're the ones being investigated. The federal investigator, Haley said. My father had a contact. I used his frequency on the mountain radio. He confirmed receipt. A name on a frequency isn't a guarantee. No, she agreed. But my father trusted him enough to write down his contact information and seal it in a box he expected to survive his own death. That's a specific level of trust. Travis, who had been cleaning the residue of smoke and fire extinguisher off his hands at the shop sink, turned around. There's a faster way to know if the federal contact is clean. Everyone looked at him. Give him something small first. Something verifiable. Something Pike can't easily suppress. See what happens to it. He dried his hands. If it goes somewhere, the channel is clean. If it disappears, we know. Ray made a sound of agreement. Ray was in a sling now. The paramedic on the mountain had recommended it for the shoulder, and he had agreed to the sling with the specific energy of a man who intends to comply with medical advice up to the precise limit of his own tolerance. What's small enough to test, but significant enough to matter if it lands right? Haley had already thought about this. She had been thinking about it on the mountain road while Cole drove through the beginning of the storm. The vehicle registration on the truck that blocked the road, she said. The volunteer wrote down the plate. If that truck is registered to a company with any connection to Pike's network, that's one thread. Not enough to build a case on, but enough to tell us if the investigator acts on it. Cole looked at Travis. Travis said, I can run the plate in about 20 minutes. Do it. Travis left. Mason had been quiet through this exchange, which was unusual enough that Haley had been monitoring it. Mason's quiet was different from Travis's quiet. Where Travis went silent to observe, Mason silent when he was working through something that mattered to him personally and hadn't decided yet whether to say it. He looked at her now. The night of my crash, he said. Carl Whitfield, the veteran, who gave me the documents, he called me 3 days before. He said someone had been asking about him. People he didn't know, asking his neighbors if he was home, what kind of car he drove. He paused. I told him he was being careful, and that was good. And I picked up the documents in person to reduce the electronic trail. I took a route I hadn't used before. Another pause. A route that went past the overpass. You didn't tell anyone which route you were taking, she said. I didn't tell anyone which route I was taking. He looked at his hands. Which means either my bike was already compromised before I left a tracking device, something in the fuel line, or someone was already watching Whitfield closely enough to anticipate that whatever he handed off would come past that tunnel. Or both, Cole said. Or both, Mason agreed. The room worked through that. Whitfield, Haley said. Where is he now? The silence that followed was not the comfortable kind. Cole looked at Mason. Mason looked at the workbench. We don't know, Cole said. Her chest went tight. Not dramatically, the physical equivalent of a problem, clicking into a new configuration in her mind. Carl Whitfield had handed over everything he had to a man on a motorcycle, and that man had been run into a drainage tunnel, and the documents had been taken from impound. And the veteran who had spent 2 years trying to get someone to listen was now unaccounted for. We need to find him, she said. I've been trying since yesterday morning, Mason said. And the strain in those words was not about the ankle. His phone goes to voicemail. His neighbor says his car hasn't moved in 2 days. 2 days. Mason's crash had been 2 days ago address, she said. Haley, his address, Mason. He gave it to her. She wrote it on her hand in pen because she didn't trust herself to remember it accurately in the current state of her thinking. She was moving fast, and she knew that when she moved this fast, she had to. If externalized the things she couldn't afford to drop. Travis came back from the office. He had his phone in his hand. The truck is registered to a company called Ridgeline Property Solutions. Ridgeline Property Solutions shares a registered agent with 2 of the shell companies in your father's documents. He looked at Haley. It's not a small thread. She forwarded this to the federal contact number with the plate number and the connection and the location of the fire and the timestamp of the blocked road. She sent the audio file of her father's recording as a compressed attachment. Then she looked at Cole. I need to go to Whitfield's address. You're not going alone. I wasn't planning to go alone. Cole and Haley went. Travis came without being asked. Ray stayed with Mason, which Ray proposed and Mason argued with for 4 minutes before Ray said, simply, your ankle. And Mason stopped arguing and said to bring him back in one piece, meaning Whitfield. Carl Whitfield lived in a one-story house on the eastern edge of Silver Creek, the kind of neighborhood that had been working class for 60 years and had the particular dignity of a place where people fixed things rather than replaced them. The car in his driveway had not moved. In 2 days, she could see the undisturbed film of frost on the hood from where they parked. Cole knocked on the door, waited, knocked again. From inside, a sound. Small, effortful, she moved past Cole and tried the door. Unlocked. She went in. Carl Whitfield was in the kitchen, on the floor beside the table. 71 years old, gray-haired, wearing the clothes he had apparently been wearing for 2 days. Conscious but barely dehydrated, she assessed within the first 10 seconds of crouching beside him, and there was a head injury at his left temple. Superficial but real, the kind that comes from a fall rather than an impact. His left ankle was swollen inside his boot. Carl, she said, putting her hand on his arm. My name is Haley Monroe. I'm Daniel Monroe's daughter. Mason sent me. He opened his eyes, focused on her slowly, and then said, with the careful diction of a man working hard through a significant headache, I wondered when somebody was going to show up. She worked on him while Cole called for an ambulance. She kept him still, kept him talking in the measured way of someone who knows that the voice and the brain are connected, and that engagement maintains consciousness. And Carl Whitfield talked. He had fallen 2 days ago, had heard someone at his door. Stood too fast, gone dizzy, gone down. He had not been attacked. He had been alone with his own aging body and a fear that had kept him from calling for help because he didn't know was safe to call. I thought they were coming for me, he said. His voice was the voice of a man who has carried something heavy for a very long time. After I gave Mason those documents, I thought it's going to happen to me the same way it happened to the others. They'll find a reason. They'll make me the story instead of the crime. That's not happening, she said. He looked at her. You sound sure. I am sure, she said. Because I've been the story instead of the crime for 11 months, and I know what it takes to change that. He was quiet for a moment. Then your father talked about you. Couple of times. Before everything. He said his daughter was going to be a paramedic. He said she had his stubbornness and her mother's patience. And that combination was going to make her either very effective or very difficult. She made herself keep her face steady. Was he right? Carl asked. Probably both, she said. Drink this. She had found a glass and filled it from the tap, and she held it while he drank because his hands weren't fully reliable yet. The ambulance arrived, and she rode with Carl to the county hospital. And Cole followed on the motorcycle. And when they got Carl admitted and stabilized, and into a room with a nurse who was monitoring him and an IV that was addressing the dehydration, Haley stood in the hospital corridor and felt something shift in her chest in a way she hadn't felt in a long time. Her phone rang. Unknown number, but she answered it because she was done not answering things. Ms. Monroe. A man's voice, measured, professional. The voice of someone who had been in federal law enforcement long enough to have burned off every unnecessary quality. My name is Agent Randall Briggs. I received your transmissions from the Mountain Relay Station, and I received your file 30 minutes ago. I need you to understand something. Go ahead, she said. I've had an open file on the Silver Creek Veterans Housing Foundation for 14 months. I have been unable to move on it because every time I develop a line of inquiry, the line closes before I can follow it. County connections, I believe, but I haven't been able to confirm the entry point. A pause. What you sent me is the entry point. She leaned against the corridor wall. Daniel Monroe tried to reach me in 2008, Briggs continued. I got a message from him through a relay contact. Before I could respond, he was dead. I have been carrying that for 16 years, Ms. Monroe. She closed her eyes for a moment. Open them. What do you need from me? She asked. I need the physical documents. I need the recorder. I need you and the men you're working with to be somewhere specific and secure for the next 24 hours while I move on this. Because once I start moving, Pike is going to know, and he's already demonstrated a willingness to remove obstacles. Where? He gave her a location, a federal field office, 4 hours north, with a secure transport provision that would get them there without using routes that Pike's people could anticipate. He said he would have 2 agents at the repair shop within 3 hours. She said, before you do anything else, there's a veteran named Carl Whitfield in Silver Creek County Hospital. He needs protection. A pause brief. Done. She ended the call and stood there in the corridor for a moment. Then she called Cole. He answered on the first ring. Federal contact is clean, she said. He's been trying to build this case for 14 months. He needs the physical evidence, and he needs us in a secure location for 24 hours. A silence on Cole's end. Not hesitation, processing. She had learned the difference. Okay, he's moving tonight. Once he starts, Pike finds out. I understand. She paused. He said my father tried to reach him in 2008. Before the accident, he got the message after. The silence on Cole's end was longer this time. Then Danny got to the right person, Cole said finally. Just too late. Not too late, she said. 16 years late, she pushed away from the wall. Come get me. We need to move. The next 3 hours were the fastest and most precise hours she had experienced since the tunnel. They went back to the repair shop. They packaged the documents and the recorder for federal transfer. Ray packed his shoulder into a second sling with the resigned dignity of a man accepting a limitation he finds unreasonable but tactically sound. Mason, when told they were relocating for 24 hours to a federal secure location, said finally something is actually happening and got into the van Cole had arranged without further complaint. The 2 federal agents arrived at 2 hours and 50 minutes, 10 minutes early, which told her something about how seriously Briggs was taking the timeline. They were 4 hours north by 9 o'clock that evening. The next morning, warrant activity began in Silver Creek simultaneously at 6 separate locations. Haley knew this because Briggs called her at 6:15 to confirm it had started, and because her phone immediately began receiving notifications from a Silver Creek local news alert she had set up 3 months ago on the theory that eventually something would move, and she wanted to know when. Warren Pike was arrested at his home at 6:42 a.m. She did not watch the news coverage. She sat in a chair in the federal field office break room with a cup of coffee and looked at the table and let the information arrive in her without performing anything about it. Mason came and sat across from her. He didn't say anything for a while, which she appreciated more than anything he could have said. Then he said, "How are you doing?" She thought about the question seriously. "I don't know yet," she said. "I've been moving toward this for a long time. I don't have a clear picture of what being on the other side of it looks like." That's honest. "I'm trying to be honest. You're doing well at it." He turned his coffee cup in his hands. "You know what happens now, legally. The forensic examination of the records, the charges, the trial. It takes time, a lot of it." "I know." And the story gets out. "Your name. What happened to you? People will have opinions." "People have always had opinions," she said. "That's not the part that worries me." "What's the part that worries you?" She looked at him. "That it gets treated as a story. Pike bad, girl good. Bikers help. Justice served. Clean. Simple. And the actual problem, the way the system allowed all of this to happen, the way my father's warnings were ignored, the way my accusations were dismissed because of who I was and who Pike was, that part stays the same." Mason was quiet for a moment. "So what do you do about that?" She looked at her coffee. She had been thinking about this for 11 months. Not constantly. There had been days when survival had required the entirety of her attention and there was no room for anything else. But in the spaces between, in the hours under the overpass, when she was not cold enough to focus on cold and not hungry enough to focus on hunger, she had thought about what it would mean to come out the other side of this and what she would do with the coming out. She said, "I don't leave." He looked at her. "I stay in Silver Creek, and I build something that makes it harder for the next Warren Pike to operate. Something that gives people like Carl Whitfield somewhere to go before they've been on the floor 2 days. Something that gives people like me somewhere to go before 11 months under an overpass. She paused. And I make it completely transparent, every dollar publicly accounted for, every decision auditable. I make the mechanism so clean that anyone who tries to run the same game inside it spends more energy on the disguise than on the crime. Mason was looking at her with the expression of a man who has asked a question, expecting a moderate answer, and received, instead, something that requires him to revise his assessment of the person he is talking to. That's not a small thing, he said. No, she said. It's not, he nodded slowly. What can I do? She looked at him. The question was genuine. Not what do you need from me in this moment, what can I do? Meaning going forward. Meaning he was asking to be part of it. I'll let you know, she said, when I know what the shape of it is. Okay, he said. And there was something in the word that was a commitment rather than an acknowledgement. Cole appeared in the doorway. Briggs wants a formal statement today. You up for it? Yes, she said. It's going to take a while. They're going to go through everything. I've had the everything ready for 11 months, she said. And she stood up and took her coffee and went to give her statement. And the statement she gave lasted 4 hours and covered every document, every date, every name, every transaction she had identified in the foundation's accounts. And when it was done, Agent Briggs looked at her across the table and said, Miss Monroe, I want to say something that is outside my professional function. She waited. Your father tried very hard to do the right thing, Briggs said, and the system failed him, and then it failed you. And I want you to know that I understand what that means, and I am sorry that it took this long. She sat with that. She did not dismiss it, and she did not let land harder than it was equipped to land. Do the work, she said. That's the apology that matters. He held her gaze for a moment. Then he nodded. Back in Silver Creek 2 days later, the difference was visible in the particular way a place looks when a large, long-standing falsehood has been removed from it, not dramatically different, not transformed, but slightly cleaner in the light, like a window that has been washed. The news coverage was exactly what she had predicted. Pike bad, girl good. Bikers help. Justice served. She gave one interview to a journalist who she had researched in advance and determined wrote with accuracy and without sentimentality. And in that interview, she said what she needed to say about the systemic conditions that had allowed this to happen. And the journalist was good enough to print it without softening it. Her scholarship was formally restored 12 days after Pike's arrest, when the college received the forensic confirmation that the records used to revoke it were fabricated. The letter came to the repair shop address because she still didn't have a permanent mailing address, and she opened it at the workbench beside Mason, who read it over her shoulder without asking permission and said, yeah, with a quiet satisfaction that was less about the restoration itself and more about the specific, long-delayed rightness of it. She still hid food under the bed. She knew she did it, knew why she did it, was not yet at the place in recovery where knowing the reason was sufficient to stop the behavior. She woke when headlights crossed the wall, and her heart was in her throat before her brain caught up with where she was. She had taken to tracking exits in every room she entered second nature now, probably permanent. But she was sleeping, not well, not consistently, but sleeping. And she was eating at a table with people who expected her to be there. Cole came to the repair shop one evening with something under his arm, wrapped in canvas. He set it on the workbench and looked at her. There's something we need to talk about, he said. She was quiet, waiting. After Danny died, we kept some of his things. Things his mother had given us to hold. His mother died 4 years later, and there was nobody else to give them to because we'd been told. He stopped, breathed, tried again. We've been holding them for 16 years. He unwrapped the canvas. Her father's medical bag. Worn leather with the silver hawk tooled into the flap, the original. The one the embroidered patch had been modeled on. She had never seen it in person. Her mother had described it once, briefly, in the particular way of someone who found the describing expensive. She put her hand on it, did not pick it up yet. There's more, Cole said. But it can wait until you're ready. There's a motorcycle, she said. She didn't know how she knew, Maybe it was the way he'd said more, or the way he'd come in alone rather than with the others. He looked at her for a moment. Yeah, there's a motorcycle. Does it have Silverhawk on the tank, he said. Yes, she breathed in. The edges of that breath were not entirely steady, and she let them be not entirely steady, which was its own kind of progress. I'm not ready for that yet, she said. I know, Cole said. It'll be there when you are. She picked up her father's medical bag. It was lighter than she'd expected, or maybe she was stronger than she'd expected. She held it in her lap and felt its weight, which was not the weight of leather and metal clasps, but the weight of a man who had done the right thing in the time he had, even when the time ran out before the doing was finished. She thought about what came next. Not the trial that was in motion, and Briggs was thorough and the evidence was solid and Pike's network was unraveling by the day as each new arrest produced cooperation from someone who had not previously been cooperative. Not the scholarship or the restoration of her records or the financial settlement that was being discussed in terms she hadn't fully processed yet. She was thinking about the abandoned service station she had walked past 100 times near the railway overpass. Large enough, structurally sound, according to what she could assess from the outside. Close to the population she needed to reach. She was thinking about a name. And she was thinking about the very specific kind of work that needs to be done, not after problem is solved, but precisely because solving one problem reveals the infrastructure that allows the next one. Outside, she could hear the repair shop winding down for the evening, the particular sequence, some sounds that ended a working day. Tools on hooks, the roll of the bay door, the low conversation of men who have spent the day doing useful things and are comfortable with the silence that follows usefulness. She was comfortable with it too, she realized. That was new. The comfort of ordinary sounds in a place that held people who knew she was there. She held her father's bag and let herself feel it, not the loss. She had carried the loss for 11 months under an overpass in November, and she knew every part of it by now. She let herself feel the other thing, the thing underneath the loss that had been there the whole time, that the loss had been sitting on top of, that she was only now, in this specific evening, in this specific place, with these specific people, beginning to reach, that her father had seen her, that he had known exactly who she was and what she was capable of and had trusted her completely with the most important thing he had to leave behind. That his trust had been accurate, that it still was. The trial of Warren Pike opened on a Tuesday in March, 7 months after his arrest, in a federal courthouse 4 hours north of Silver Creek, and Haley Monroe sat in the third row behind the prosecution table and did not shake. She had expected to shake. She had rehearsed not shaking for 6 weeks, the way she had once rehearsed emergency medical procedures repetition, until the body knows what to do independent of what the mind is feeling. She had sat in the room above Mason's repair shop in the evenings and read through her statement and imagined Pike's face across the room and made herself breathe through it until breathing through it was automatic. It worked. Mostly. Pike looked smaller than she had expected. That was the thing nobody told you about confronting the person who had dismantled your life. They were always smaller than the space they had occupied in your mind. He was a trim man in his late 50s, with the careful presentation of someone who had spent decades managing other people's perceptions of him, and he sat at the defense table with the composed stillness of a man who still believed, at some cellular level, that this was a situation he could manage. She watched him scan the courtroom when he came in, watched him clock the rows of people, the federal agents, the journalists, the veterans, and their families who had driven hours to be present. She watched him find Agent Briggs and assess him. She watched him find Cole and assess him differently. She watched him find her. He held her gaze for exactly 2 seconds. Then he looked away. She filed that away. 2 seconds was a tell. 2 seconds was a man deciding that looking at her longer was a mistake he wasn't prepared to make in public. Good, she thought. Know who's in this room. The prosecution opened with the financial records, her father's sealed boxes, forensically authenticated, chain of custody documented in the tight-linked way that federal investigators build chains of custody when they know the other side will attack every link. The numbers were large enough to be abstract, and the prosecutor made them concrete by reading the names attached to them: veterans, families, housing applications submitted and approved and then redirected, people who had trusted the system and been used as conduits for theft without ever knowing it. Carl Whitfield testified on the second day. He walked to the stand with a cane. His ankle had healed imperfectly. The result of 2 days on a kitchen floor without treatment, and he sat in the witness chair with the quiet authority of a man who has been waiting a very long time to say true things in a room where true things are required to be recorded. Haley watched him testify. She watched the jury watch him. She had learned over the past 7 months to read rooms the way her father had apparently read financial documents, looking for where the weight was, where the attention concentrated, what the gaps between words contained. The jury was watching Carl Whitfield the way people watch something they recognize. Not his specific story. Most of them had not been defrauded by a veterans charity, but the specific quality of a person who has been wronged and has not allowed the wronging to make them bitter, only more precise, that they recognized, that lived in them somewhere, the way most true things live in most people somewhere, waiting for a corresponding frequency. Cole testified on the fourth day. He took the stand without any visible preparation for how to manage himself in a courtroom, which meant he told the truth directly and without performance, and direct, unperformed truth in a courtroom had a specific impact that Haley had not fully understood until she watched it happen. He described Daniel Monroe's letter. He described his own failure to act on it. He did not soften either account. When the defense attorney asked him whether he had any personal grudge against Warren Pike, Cole said, "I have a personal opinion about men who kill people who trust them and then go to charity galas." And the judge sustained the objection, but the jury had already heard it, and Cole sat back in his chair with the expression of a man who had said exactly what he meant to say. Mason, watching from the gallery row beside Haley, made a sound that was somewhere between a laugh and a sigh. "He practiced that," Haley said quietly. "He absolutely did," Mason said. She testified on the sixth day. She had written her statement herself. Briggs had reviewed it for legal accuracy and offered 2 suggestions, both of which she adopted because they were right, not because he had suggested them. She had read it aloud 6 times in the room above the repair shop, twice with Mason listening, and twice with Cole listening, and twice alone at 2 in the morning when the room was quiet and she could hear her own voice without anyone else's reaction in the way. The courtroom was very full on the 6th day. She had not expected, that had not tracked the coverage closely enough to anticipate that her name and her story had accumulated over 7 months of pretrial reporting, a weight of public attention that would translate into a full gallery and cameras in the hall outside, and a line of people who had arrived 2 hours early for a seat. She walked to the stand and sat down and looked at the room. Pike was 20 feet away. He was looking at his hands. She looked at the jury. 12 people who had agreed to decide what was true. She told them what was true. She started with the accounting discrepancies she had found, not the large, dramatic numbers, but the small ones, the first ones, the ones she had noticed because she was detail-oriented in the specific way of someone who had grown up watching a father read financial attention of someone who understood that money was not abstract, that money was people's lives in numeric form. She described reporting it internally. She described what happened afterward. She described the forged records and the manipulated video and the 3 witnesses who had given false statements and 2 of whom had since recanted and were cooperating with the prosecution. She described losing her scholarship, her apartment, her references, her training placement. She described her mother's illness. She described 8 months on the street. She did not perform any of it. She did not reach for emotional effect at the moments when emotional effect would have been easy to reach for. She simply said what had happened, in the order it had happened, with the specific details that made it real. When she was done, the courtroom was quiet in a way that courtrooms are not usually quiet. The defense attorney stood up for cross-examination. He was a careful man who had prepared carefully, and she had expected that. He asked her about the original theft accusation. He asked her whether she had any financial motive for her allegation against Pike. He asked her whether she had coordinated her testimony with the other witnesses. She answered each question directly. She did not elaborate when elaboration would have been self-serving. She did not hedge when straightforwardness would have been more accurate. Then he asked, "Ms. Monroe, isn't it true that by your own account, you spent 11 months living on the street, during which time you had ample opportunity to fabricate or supplement the documentation you claim to have been carrying?" She looked at him. She had prepared for this question too. Briggs had warned her it was coming. And she had written an answer and then thrown answer away and written another one and then thrown that away as well, and decided, in the end, to answer it the way she answered everything directly and without performance. She said, "The documentation I carried was original. The forensic analysis your office received confirms that. But I want to answer the actual question underneath your question, which is whether a homeless woman is credible." She paused. "I spent 11 months on the street because Warren Pike fabricated evidence against me. During that time, I was treated by most institutions and most individuals as though my circumstances were evidence of my character. I want the jury to understand that homelessness is a circumstance. It is not a character assessment. It is not a credibility assessment. I maintained this documentation because the truth was the only thing I had that belonged entirely to me and that nobody could take." The defense attorney sat down. The prosecution rested. She walked back to her seat in the gallery and sat beside Mason, and he put his hand on the bench between them, and she put her hand next to his, and they sat like that through the remainder of the session, not touching, just proximate, which was enough. Cole was 2 seats down. He caught her eye and nodded, once the nod of a man who has just watched something he needed to see. The jury deliberated for 2 days. Haley spent those 2 days in Silver Creek because she could not sit in a hotel room waiting, and because there was work to do. There was always work to do. And the work was the thing that kept her oriented when waiting wanted to consume her. The work was the service station. She had begun the acquisition process 6 weeks after Pike's arrest, with the financial settlement that was being advanced from the frozen foundation assets. It was a complicated process. The station had 3 partial ownership claims from the previous owner's estate, a lien from a contractor who had done structural work 12 years ago and never been paid, and a zoning classification that needed amendment before it could operate as a community services facility. She had worked through each obstacle with the specific patience of someone who has learned that the obstacle is not the enemy, that the obstacle is just the work that needs to happen before the next part of the work. Ray had become, unexpectedly, her primary partner in the structural renovation. His shoulder had healed imperfectly, with a limited range of motion on the right side, that he worked around with the efficient practicality of a man who was not interested in being limited. And he had arrived at the service station one morning 3 months ago with a structural engineer he knew and a list of what needed to happen before the building was safe for occupation, and a look that said he had decided to be useful and was not going to discuss it. She had not asked him to come. She had not needed to. Travis had handled the legal research on the zoning amendment and the lien clearance. He had done this without being asked, had simply appeared one day with a folder of research and said, "You need a variance and a settlement agreement. Here's the path," and handed her the folder. She had looked at it and looked at him, said thank you. And he had said, "Yup," and left, which was the most Travis interaction she had experienced. And she had come to understand it as complete. Mason had handled the employment connections. He knew people, veterans, tradespeople, small business owners across 3 counties, and he had spent 2 months making calls and having conversations and building a network of people willing to provide real employment referrals to the center's clients, not charity employment, but actual jobs with actual wages. The kind of work that gave people a ground to stand on rather than a hand reaching down from above. He had done all of this with his ankle in a proper brace and without once suggesting that anyone owed him anything for it. The morning the jury came back with a verdict, Haley was at the service station with Ray, measuring the back room that was going to become the document assistant's office. Her phone rang. Briggs. Guilty, he said, on all counts. All defendants. The conspiracy charges include Daniel Monroe's death. I want you to hear that specifically, the jury found that Pike's organization was responsible for the accident. It's on the record. She stood in the back room with the measuring tape in her hand and the phone against her ear and let that land. Guilty on all counts. Her father's death on the record. The fraud, the obstruction, the manipulation of evidence. The forged death notice that had sent Cole's search for Daniel's family in the wrong direction for 16 years, all of it. Now, true in the only place that truth is officially witnessed. Thank you, she said, for the 16 years. A pause on Briggs's end. Thank you for the evidence to work with, he said. She ended the call. Ray was watching her from across the room. He had stopped measuring and was just standing there, waiting for whatever she was going to tell him. Guilty, she said. All counts. Ray breathed out through his nose, long and slow. Good, he said, and the word carried everything he wasn't going to say around it, which was considerable. She called Mason. He picked up on the first ring, which meant he had been holding the phone. Guilty, she said. He was quiet for a moment. Then are you okay? I'm at the station, she said. Ray and I are measuring the document room. That's not what I asked. She looked at the wall in front of her. New drywall, Ray's work, clean and even. I'm okay, she said. I think I'm actually okay. Good, he said, and the word in his voice was different from the word in Ray's, not less genuine. Just a different frequency of genuine. The opening is in 3 weeks, she said. I need the vehicle bay finished. The vehicle bay will be finished, he said. Mason, it will be finished, Haley. Okay, she said. Then I'll see you tonight, she called Cole last. He didn't answer, which meant he was somewhere he couldn't talk, which meant he had already heard. She sent him a text, guilty on everything. She did not add anything else because there was nothing to add. Everything had been said in the courtroom, and everything had been said between them in 7 months of working toward this. And the verdict was the last sentence of a conversation that had started in a drainage tunnel on a November morning and had now reached its proper ending. He texted back 3 minutes later, Danny knew. She put the phone in her pocket and picked up the measuring tape and went back to work. The opening of the Daniel and Rebecca Monroe Roadside Recovery Center took place on a Saturday morning in late October, exactly 1 year and 1 week after Haley had found Mason Callahan in a flooding drainage tunnel. The weather was cold and clear, the way Silver Creek in October was cold and clear when it wasn't being something much worse. And the street outside the old service station was full of people in a way that the street outside a newly opened community center ought to be. There was no ribbon. She had been asked about a ribbon and had said no because ribbon cutting felt like performance, and she was not interested in performance. There was coffee from a coffee truck that Travis had arranged without telling her he was arranging it, and there were folding tables covered with information about services that the center would provide, and there were 3 veterans sitting with a legal aid attorney who had driven down from Denver on her own time because she had read about the case and believed in what was being built. Haley moved through the morning talking to people. Not performing talking, actually talking. The way she had learned to talk in the months since the trial, with the specific quality of attention she had always had but had spent 11 months keeping compressed and hidden, now available, now extended, now doing the work it was built to do. She talked to a man named Garrett, who was 26, and had been sleeping in his car for 4 months after a landlord had used his veteran status against him in a housing dispute. She gave him the direct number for the legal aid attorney and watched him look at the number and then look at her and nod. And in that nod was the specific gravity of a person who has just been seen. She knew that gravity. She understood exactly what it weighed. Carl Whitfield was there, with his cane and his precise diction and a look on his face that she would carry in her memory for a long time, the look of a man who has lived long enough to see something he helped cause become something that would outlast him. He found her mid-morning and stood beside her and looked at the room. "Your father would have done something like this," he said. "He was going to," she said, "before everything." "Well," Carl looked at the room again. "You're doing it for both of you." She thought about that. She thought about the letter her father had made on a handheld recorder in a decommissioned mountain rescue station, and the trust he had stitched into a patch that she had carried for 11 months without knowing what it held, and the 16 years between his death and this morning, in which the truth had been kept alive by a handful of documents in a waterproof box, and a woman who had refused to throw away a drive full of evidence, even when there was nobody left who would receive it. "Yeah," she said, "I think that's right." Cole arrived at mid-morning. He came in with Ray and Travis, and they moved through the room with the particular quality of men who are not trying to be noticed and are being noticed anyway, because that was simply the reality of who they were. They helped carry chairs when chairs needed carrying. They answered questions when people asked them questions. They did not make the morning about themselves. Cole found her eventually near the back of the center where the vehicle bay opened onto the parking area. The bay was clean and functional and had 3 bays for vehicle repair. All of them staffed today by people Mason had organized mechanics who had agreed to donate hours on a rotating schedule. Real skilled work, the kind that gives people their transportation back, and with it, their ability to get to jobs and appointments and the ordinary logistics of a functional life. Cole stood beside her and looked at the bay. "I have something for you," he said. She had been expecting this. She had been expecting it for 3 weeks, since Mason had told her without quite telling her that it was coming. "The motorcycle," she said. "Yeah," she breathed in. It was a controlled breath, the kind she had been practicing. "Is it here?" "Outside. I can bring it in, or you can go to it, whatever you want." "Whatever you want." She had noticed, over 7 months, how consistently the men around her had framed things as her choices, not in a performed, careful way, in the genuine way of people who understood, from living among people who had had choices taken from them, that the restoration of agency was not a gesture, but a practice. She went outside. The motorcycle was a Harley, her father's Road King, restored to a condition that was not original. It was better than original, not because anyone had tried to make it something it wasn't, but because the people who had worked on it understood that care and craft were the same thing when the work was done right. The silver hawk on the fuel tank had been repainted by someone with a steady hand and a respect for the original, and it was the same hawk that lived on the embroidered patch in her backpack and on the tooled leather of the medical bag on the workbench in the repair shop. She stood in front of it. Mason came to stand beside her. She heard him before she saw him, the slight uneven quality of his walk that the ankle had left, permanent now, something he moved with rather than around. "I'm not going to tell you how to feel about it," he said. "Good," she said. "I'm also not going to tell you where to go with it." "Also good." He stood beside her in the quiet. Around them, the morning, continued voices from inside, the sound of coffee cups, the low, ongoing conversation of a place that had just opened its doors and was already doing what it had been built to do. "He left it for you," Mason said. Cole said he told them, before he died, that if anything happened to him, it should go to his daughter when she was ready. She put her hand on the fuel tank, the silver hawk under her palm. "He knew I'd come back to Silver Creek," she said. "Not a question." "He knew you," Mason said. "Same thing." She stood there with her hand on the fuel tank and let herself feel the full weight of it, not just the motorcycle, not just the object, but everything it had been sitting at the center of for 16 years. All the loss and the waiting and the 11 months under an overpass and the 41 pages and the recording in the courtroom and the verdict and the morning she was standing in right now with a building full of people behind her and her father's machine under her hand. She thought about the last time she had been on a motorcycle at 7 years old, in front of her father, his arms around her, the vibration of the engine, through her whole body. The cold air and the smell of leather and the absolute certainty of being held by someone who would not let go. She thought about 11 months of sleeping with her back to a concrete wall and her backpack on her shoulder. She thought about the difference between those two things and the road between them, which was not a metaphor, which was the actual specific road of the past year, the tunnel, the clinic, the repair shop, the mountain, the courthouse, and now this morning in front of this building with this key that Cole was placing in her hand without ceremony. If the way you hand someone something that has always been theirs. She took the key. She did not ride immediately. She went back inside first because there were people in there who needed to be seen today, and being seen was the whole point, and the motorcycle would be there when the morning was done. She spent the next 2 hours doing the work, talking to Garrett again, working through his housing dispute timeline with the legal aid attorney, sitting with a woman named Denise who was 43 and had been living in her sister's basement for 8 months after her benefits claim had been dismissed on a paperwork technicality, walking Denise through the document assistance process, making sure Denise left with 3 appointments and a list of names and the specific kind of longer face that meant she was no longer certain the system would defeat her. That look. She was going to spend her life working for that look. At 2 in the afternoon, when the formal morning programming was winding down and the centers was settling into its first ordinary afternoon of operation, she went back outside. Cole was there, Ray, Travis, Mason, Carl Whitfield leaning on his cane, and behind them, in ones and twos, the people who had stayed, some of the veterans, some of their families, the legal aid attorney who had never introduced herself by her last name and was therefore just Chris with a K, the journalist who had printed what Haley needed printed. She looked at them, at the specific gathering of people that this morning had assembled, which was not a crowd and not a ceremony, but a collection of lives that had touched each other in the past year and had each been changed by the touching. She got on the motorcycle. It took her a moment to orient to the machine. It had been 15 years, and she was not 7, and the controls were real and required her full attention. She found the position, found the balance, found the relationship between her body and the machine that her body had apparently been keeping in storage without her knowledge. She looked at Mason. He was watching her with the expression she had come to associate with him at his most honest, direct, warm, not performing anything. He had never once looked at her the way people had looked at her under the overpass, the way people look when they have already decided who someone is and are merely confirming it. He had looked at her from the first moment in the tunnel as someone whose full depth was yet to be established. She would not forget that. It was one of the things worth not forgetting. She started the engine. The vibration moved through her exactly as she remembered it, through the bones, through the chest, through the particular register of the body that doesn't have a name, but recognizes things that the mind hasn't processed yet. She looked at the overpass down the road. She could see it from here. She could see the embankment where she had slept, the drainage channel where she had gone in for a stranger on a November morning, the maintenance hatch that had opened onto a gray pre-dawn sky that was the beginning of everything that had led to this. She looked forward. Cole came to stand beside the motorcycle. He didn't say anything. He put his hand briefly on her shoulder, the touch of a man passing something along, rather than taking anything for himself, and then stepped back. She rode, not toward the overpass, forward, down the road that left Silver Creek and then curved back toward it, the long way, the way that required commitment before it permitted return. She rode it at the speed her father would have ridden it, not fast, not slow, with the specific attention to the road that keeps you connected to where you are rather than arriving somewhere else in your head. She rode it with her father's hawk on the tank beneath her and her mother's stitching in her jacket pocket, and 11 months of hard knowledge in her body that she would carry forever. Not as damage, but as fluency, the fluency of someone who understands, at a cellular level, what it costs to be ignored and what it takes to refuse to disappear. When she came back around, the building was still there. The people were still there. The plaque Ray had mounted beside the entrance was simple brushed steel, 4 lines, her father's words from the recording. She had chosen them herself, had listened to the recording one more time, and written down the words that had been living in her since the first time she heard them. She parked the motorcycle and walked to the plaque and read it. Not because she needed to read it, she had the words memorized. Had them the way she had the addresses of every shelter she had ever avoided, the way she had the frequencies of the emergency radio, the way she had the exact leverage calculations for a railroad timber in a flooding tunnel. But because reading it here, in front of this building, on this morning, was the last act of the story she had been living and the first act of the life she was building, and it deserved her full attention. A person's worth does not disappear simply because the world stops looking. She had started as a girl beneath an overpass that the world had decided not to see. She had gone into a tunnel for a stranger because there was no version of herself that could walk away from need. She had carried the truth through 11 months of being told she was not the kind of person whose truth mattered. She had built something real in the town where her father had tried and not finished. And she had done it not because she owed the town anything, and not because she needed to prove anything to anyone, but because the problem was real and she was capable. And those two facts together had always been sufficient reason. The 3 riders who had found her in that tunnel had uncovered her past. They had given her a name back, a history back, a family back, the kind of family that chooses itself rather than inheriting itself and is the stronger for the choosing. But the life she was standing inside on this October morning, the center and the work and the key in her pocket, and the hawk on the tank, and the people behind her who had been seen today and would be seen tomorrow, that was not something anyone had given her. That was entirely hers. She had built it out of the exact materials that were meant to break her, and it was going to stand for a very long time.